Hello, welcome to a Lanchester video. Normally I don't pop up at the start of the videos, so in relation to what you're about to see, this is present day me, and the video was recorded quite a while ago while I was still working through the wiring problems. We'll get into that in the video. What I wanted to do here was just fill in any new viewers and anybody even who's been around a while what the car is, where it came from, and what's going on. Because the series has been running for a while, as you'll see if you pop into the playlist there, and maybe you don't know what the score is. Pat and I, a few years ago, were wanting to get a joint project. Up until now, all the car project stuff is mine. But Pat's into his cars as well. So it seemed a bit unfair that I had stuff and he didn't. So we started looking at what things we both liked, and we learned that we both liked the idea of getting something pre-war into the sort of mid-50s and something that was just a little bit different. We wanted something original. We didn't want something that had been modified or repainted, and we especially didn't want something nice. And I know that might sound a little bit counterintuitive to some of you, but the idea was we wanted to find something where it just hadn't been messed about with, where it was all still fairly original, so any information that is out there would likely work for the car that we bought. We weren't specifically looking for a Lanchester. There were a lot of other cars that we considered and didn't go for. Funnily enough, this was the first car that we actually went to view. It was up for sale on eBay. We ended up paying £2,000 including delivery for it, which seemed quite reasonable looking at the going rate of similar projects online. We were happy to pay it, the seller was happy to receive it. That's the right price as far as we're concerned. When we went to see the car, Pat wasn't as enthused about it as I was. I was quite excited that this seemed to tick all of our boxes, and Pat was a little bit more reserved. Until we got there. And as soon as we both saw the car, I think we both decided pretty much instantly that we wanted it. It ticked every box. It was complete. It didn't seem to have any of the important bits missing, but the only thing we didn't know was whether or not it ran. So we spoke to the owner, and he said it doesn't always like to, and it might not, but it does run. That can mean just about anything. So we rigged up a fuel supply for it, scavenged a battery for it, and gave it a try. And it started. And it idled. And he said, you can't drive it because the brakes don't work very well, and that was not a lie. And Pat and I couldn't leave without it. We had to have it. It's very difficult to explain when you make a heart overhead purchase, and that's exactly what this was. We knew if we didn't buy it, there was a good chance it was just going to stay as part of a to be restored one day collection. And if it did escape, with some of the comments that we'd seen about this particular car online, there was a good chance it would also get broken for spares. And that seemed a shame. And it seemed a shame because while the car was tired, and does need some bodywork, did need interior work, still does, it was fundamentally a very viable project. All the important bits were there, and all the things that we needed to work. If you go right to the start of the playlist, you'll see some very rough video of us driving it for a very short distance. But it proves that the gearbox works. It's a pre-selector gearbox on this, which is another thing we have no experience with whatsoever. And it's very strange, but also brilliant. So we made sure everything worked that needed to before we got into it, and it was the point that we got into it that we realised that there was a lot of project here. This is why the series has gone on quite so long. The car was owned by its first owner from new in 1951 until it came off the road in 1984, which is when the last tax disc was put in the car, and it was then put into storage by them until their death, which I think was around about 2010. Sometime after then, I think it was 2015-ish, the owner we bought it from bought the car, and it became part of his collection of restoration projects, alongside other things like old Austins and tractors and stuff. He just never got around to it, and when he had it clear out, that's when we came along and we got it. So we're the third owners of this car. It's done about 24,000 miles, which we think is genuine. I know the car looks rough, and I know you might associate low mileage with pristine, but that's not always the case. The reason we think it came off the road in '84 is two things. Judging by the rewiring job that had been attempted, the wiring loom, the original wiring loom, was breaking down and was probably causing a lot of issues all on its own, just as it has been for us. The other issue is, by 1984, this is an antique. Somebody driving around in a car like this in the 80s, just as an ordinary car, bear in mind, not as some sort of special classic or something, is very unusual. So those factors combined is probably why it was stored, but somebody cared enough to put it undercover and to actually look after it twice. Now the very silly thing is, Pat and I didn't measure the car and didn't measure our garage. We just sort of guessed. And the garage is the only covered storage we have for a car like this. And that's another problem. Unlike the Briggs-bodied cars, which are all steel construction and a slightly different body shape, ours is the sports saloon with bodywork by Barker, who are coach builders. So everything from the windscreen and A-pillar forwards is steel. And the chassis, obviously, is steel. But everything from the windscreen back, apart from the rear wings, which are also steel, is aluminium on a wooden frame, which is pretty much how pre-war cars were built. And that means you can't really store it long-term outdoors, because the moisture and age will just get in at the frame and cause problems. Now we're very lucky, as far as we can tell on the frame, there's no woodworm, there's no rot, there's no real issues. It's very solid, which is excellent. The paintwork's not great, obviously. Some of the steel has rotted away, which is to be expected, but there's nothing serious on it. So our goal with the car, and we say this every year, is to actually get it on the road and get it seen, and life keeps not letting that happen. So the project will take as long as it takes, and thank you for sticking with us if you have for all of this time with this project.
I've got my two wiring diagrams and I'm trying to understand what I might have done wrong with the ignition switch. What doesn't help is when we got the car, the rear lights didn't work at all. So I can't trust the original wiring as the car came to us. The other problem, I've currently wired it according to this diagram, which is a Lucas original, but it's for a slightly older model, so some of the wiring is slightly different. For example, on the headlights, there aren't the same amount of wires going to the headlights as there are on this car. I've also got the other wiring loom I could find, and this one isn't helping me very much either, because this seems to be a different layout to the switch that we've got in the car. However, I've had a look at what's here, and the two that seem most likely to be the wrong way round is the white with black trace and blue. The other three, the yellow, the white and the red, they seem to be in the same locations as on both of the other wiring diagrams. But these two are the ones in question. Now I know the little clock in the car, here, doesn't work, and that runs off this wire here, which is the white with black. And I know I have a problem where when I put the headlights on, the rear lights all go off. So on that basis, and that basis alone, which is not very scientific of me, I'm sure, I'm going to try swapping those two over and basically seeing what happens. I don't think anything's going to blow up or whatever, but yeah, maybe that's what I've done wrong. I don't know. I had a bit of a rummage through the photo archive. Now, when it comes to working on cars, especially on stuff that I'm not confident with, I photograph everything. Doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, I photograph it because having reference is important. This is the one photograph I have of the back of that switch with the old wiring, and there's some commonalities here. I know that the red wire went to the headlights, so I can already tell that the socket I have the red wire in there is not the same. I'm not going to say wrong, it's not the same. The blue was also, I think the blue was in the same socket, and I think the green is what is yellow on there. I'm going to shuffle things around so it matches this a bit more clearly. The socket next to the red wires is empty. That's how it was when we got the car. So I think that's supposed to be the white with black trace, because that's the one I'll have left over. I'll have a shuffle and we'll see if it fixes it. Trial and error, this one. What I've learned from this is two things. One, if I wire this up as per the photograph of how the car came to us, as far as I can work out, the same problem persists where when you put the headlights on, the side lights go out. Additionally, if I wire the clock in, I can smell burning somewhere. I can't see any smoke, and I can't locate where the smell is coming from, and it may be coincidental, except for the fact that the oil light up here is very, very dim, and the lights don't function at all, so I don't know what that's about. I'm beginning to suspect this might be a dodgy switch. The two suggestions are being given by people online, thank you very much for the advice, is either I've got the wiring wrong, which is still possible, or the switch has got an issue internally, which is also quite possible. So I think I'm going to have to take the switch off, see if I can find a schematic for this particular switch, and go from there, because this switch does not match the wiring diagrams I have, and that's kind of annoying. Did a bit more researching online to find out some wiring diagrams again. Sometimes I have no luck with these things. The ignition switch you can see here is a Lucas PLC 6. Fairly widely used, but there's some other Lucas ignition switches, so when you look up diagrams and information, just make sure it's the right one, because I don't know why, something to do with the way things are found on search engines, sometimes it gets labelled as the thing you're looking for and it isn't. Anyway, I did want to take this apart. All I managed to do was stab myself in the hand with a screwdriver, and having looked at some exploded diagrams of these, yeah, taking it apart is last resort. So instead, there are, here we go, alongside the bracket there you can see a tab that folds in. You can get switch cleaner and the like in there, so I squirted in a whole bunch of cleaner, which flushed a whole load of just grime and fluff and detritus out of this. So maybe that was part of the problem. We'll find out in a bit. The other thing I found was this diagram, and this does show that some of the wiring I'd done was definitely correct. Side lights, for example, from this one is correct. Headlights from this one is correct. I just have to double check which colours it is, A3 and A, on the voltage regulator block thing on the bulkhead. Once I know which ones those are, I should be able to test this and things should work properly. But we'll see, because I'm not entirely certain just yet. I can't get my tripod in anywhere to show you this with a nice steady camera. It looks like I might have got some of the wiring on here the wrong way around. Now that I have the diagram for the ignition switch, it looks like a couple of these wires might be in the wrong place. So I'm going to double check this, and in a minute I'll show you what's been changed, if anything. I've gone through the diagrams again and tried to understand how it's supposed to be wired. I've only just pulled this out before I realised I needed to stick it to camera. After redoing everything, something is now live, I don't know what, so I'm going to disconnect everything that isn't switch related and see what we're left with. With just the switch related bits connected, I'm not getting a short. I'm also not getting any lights, I'm not getting anything at all, so I'm hating this job. I'm hating this job so much. Right, I am officially out of my depth. I'm having problems with these two wiring diagrams contradicting one another. Get out of this wind. I'm having a bit of an issue with contradiction on these wiring diagrams. I know this is from an earlier car, so I know there are going to be some slight differences, but there shouldn't be many. This diagram doesn't match what's on our car. There aren't the same instruments. It shows an ammeter, for example, which we do not have. So I think this diagram is made for somebody's car with a specific rewire for specific instruments that that car has. So again, this doesn't work for our car exactly. I'm having some issues, such as you have the purple for the roof light, which goes across here and joins up to A2. And the A2 socket has one other wire, which is for the horns. Great, no problem. The horns go to one that is labelled A. It has 3 yellow with black traces, which our loom does have, that all go into the same junction. One of them goes off to the starter, one of them goes off to inspection lamp sockets, and one goes off to the horn. But the interior light doesn't go in that socket, the interior light goes in W here, which is completely different to the other wiring diagram. So I don't know which place it's supposed to go to. And I don't have enough knowledge or experience with wiring diagrams to understand what's gone wrong here. I don't know how to proceed with this. I genuinely don't know how to proceed because these diagrams are contradicting one another. And I can't trust the wiring the car came with because not everything worked when we got the car. So, yeah. Although, I think I'll go back through the photographs and the records I've kept of removing the old wiring to try and understand what should probably be in the places it should be in, and maybe I can work it out. This is a nightmare. I hate it. Ignoring where these are connected for now, I think they're correct, but we'll come back to this in a minute. I've gone back to basics and I've labelled everything. So this is wiper motors, this is the cigar lighter power socket, these are the ignition switch from the one marked A on the ignition switch. This should help me decipher what goes in here, and maybe I'm struggling with this. I really am struggling with this because I can't find one cohesive guide for what these do on this car. I can find guides for what some of them do, and I just don't have enough experience to be able to just plug things in and go. So I'm going to be very careful, plug things in one at a time and see if I can get back to where I was before I messed everything up, and hopefully then make some progress. Pat went through with the multimeter with me and we did continuity on all of these wires, so we now know what they all do. We know where they all go and what they're all for. That should help. We've figured out this one is the inspection lamp that our car doesn't have. We've figured out the horns down there. We've got the ignition wiring is now all in, although what's strange is now none of the lights are working, so they might be in the wrong places. I'm basically done today with this one. It has been very frustrating. I think the thing I need to find now is a guide for how this is coded, what connects where on it. Once I've got that and it's the correct one, I'll know how to connect everything up properly and I can get this working again, I hope. For now, I'm just going to put things away and I need to do some research, and yeah, it's hard work. I'm not enjoying it. I'd actually rather be doing the welding than the wiring, and I really don't want to do welding at the moment. We'll get there. I feel like things are starting to come together. I'm starting to fix a few items. So right there, that shiny out of place screw is the earth point for the starter motor, and the starter motor lives down there. So I shall rewire that. I thought I'd have to take this wing off. I don't. I've just loosened the bolts here and I could take the inner wing out, which had already unbolted. This has given me far better access, far better visibility. The important thing this has allowed me to see is here is the dynamo and there's the wiring, and I've got the wires the wrong way round. If I've read the diagrams and everything correctly, I've got field and main the opposite way round. This is probably why the dynamo has been running constantly. Now, it turned itself on entirely randomly one day, so presumably up until that point it's not been working, and now it doesn't stop working. So I'm going to rewire this correctly, which is just swapping those two round. Now I have access, and hopefully that'll fix that. Once the starter motor's reconnected, maybe I can try and start the car. Now I've got the rear lights working and the front lights working, with the exception of the side lights which aren't wired up, but we'll come to that later. I want to check the starter motor's working, because I haven't yet. So I've got the earth point in and I've got the connection point. I'm going to disconnect the dynamo, see if the starter motor works. If it does, fantastic. If it doesn't, we'll do some more fault finding, and then I'll move on to the dynamo, and we'll just carry on like that. Maybe I'm winning. I don't know. I haven't enjoyed this job. I can't see myself choosing to do it again in the future. Little bit frustrating with the starter. It's gone back to deciding not to work. I can hear it trying. It makes a sort of crackly noise when you pull on the cable, and yeah, it's not quite engaging, so that's probably corroded up again inside. Great, so I'm probably going to have to take that off, which is a job. We'll see. The other problem is with the dynamo. That's going to have to come off the car because it's sheared one of the eyelets on the wiring. Let me show you. There we go, you can see the dynamo in here, and there's those two shiny brass pieces. Those are the connector points, the studs. The one towards this black bar here, which is the steering column, has come undone no problem. The other one, it managed to trap the eyelet and twist it clean off, so I need to replace that on the wiring harness, and the stud itself is spinning in the body of the dynamo. I don't know why the nut is stuck on the stud quite like that, but it is. Getting that off the car is a job for another day, because there's a through bolt this side and a through bolt over there somewhere, which I can't see properly, but I can feel, and that's how you remove it. And I've got to remove it to resolve that stud issue. So So that's fun. We're getting a bit closer. You can see as well that I took the side panel off. If you loosen this wing, you can actually lift the whole thing out through the top, so I could leave the wing on the car. That's good. We're a bit tight on storage, and these wings are quite large in every dimension. I am getting a little bit fed up of this, but I have to remind myself I've made some progress, so it's not all bad.
Me again. Yeah, it's not always a good day working on old cars. It can be frustrating sometimes. That's part of the journey. We want to show you all of the good things and all of the bad things of going through a project and what's actually involved. I want to show you more than just, will it run, will it start? That stuff's easy, comparatively. Will it work as a car is a completely different matter. Our goal with this thing is to get it through an MOT and to drive it places and just use it as a car. That's the end goal. And to do that, it's a lot more work than just getting the thing running. Getting it running was the easy bit. We didn't even have to do anything to get it running. Getting it running well, getting it being reliable, and getting it being as safe as it can be, that's a whole different story. And hopefully you'll stick around, you'll subscribe, and you'll stay for the rest of the story. We'd very much like you to. Hopefully see you next time. There are new videos and all sorts of things here every Tuesday. And thank you very much for watching this one. Bye for now.